Yeah, so from a EUC perspective, there's a lot of monitoring solutions that are out there on the market that have been around for a long time. But when you look at kind of probing, Citrix has built-in solution, right? There's other vendors on the market. They typically take you through a similar process like this, right? It's looking at kind of network response time. It'll look at either storefront or now workspace reachability. It'll look at authentication. Can you authenticate to storefront, right? Is the authentication mechanisms working? Enumeration, can it enumerate those applications? Obviously, if you don't have any apps, you don't have a workflow, right? So then it'll download the ICA file, validate that you can actually launch that session, and then it stops right there, right? It takes you to the application, it takes you to the desktop launch. Maybe you'll get a screenshot, you'll get some kind of timestamps as far as that launch, but then you stop there. And what's missing is the actual applications, right? And the applications are really what are most important to the business, right? There's a lot of back-end solutions that are monitoring, a CPU, memory, disk I/O, services, et cetera. But the most important thing is the applications and the workflow and the actual pieces of the business that are being conducted, whether it's payroll or inputting new patient records and things like that. That's really what's missing, and that's what Automai is able to bring to the table. And what we're most excited as a consulting organization. I work with Choice Solutions, and we use Automai from a monitoring as well as a load testing perspective. So if you go ahead, Sam, to the next slide there.
Sure.
I'll kind of talk through, yeah. So obviously, like I said, focus on the application. So doing the normal procedures that you're seeing in the traditional probes, but actually taking you through the application. So go ahead and hit the next slide. So the typical problems with the most, why a lot of the solutions out there aren't doing, kind of robotic testing or doing testing with the individual applications after launching the desktop is it's not easy to cover the entire workflow, right? It requires special skills for coding, whether that's AutoIT or doing VB.net and looking at window classes and things like that, and trying to find the form IDs and all that kind of good stuff. And there's high upkeep, right? That we're in a continuous world now. Everything's constantly changing. That requires upkeep and requires like I said, special skills to code. And also those solutions typically aren't checking every single desktop or session host in that delivery group or host pool. If you're talking WVD, it typically will hit that URL. If you go ahead and hit the next slide there, right? It's going to go ahead and hit that URL, and then it's basically going to get load balanced to one of those servers. So how does Automai tackle that, right? The challenges that why a lot of automation or monitoring solutions aren't looking at doing that kind of robotic testing. For us, what we got excited about it is one is the usability from a scripting standpoint. It's kind of no code, and that makes it extremely valuable from a scripting standpoint because we can actually test real workflows. But it's all from the front end, right? That's the big deal. So from the front end means that there's no agent on the actual VDA. This is something that runs like a robotic user on the front end. So it's actually launching the session, and then it's looking at images on the screen, right? It's looking at actual images. It's looking at search area. It's looking at OCR for text, and then various other kind of built-in techniques to then determine what those next steps are for the workflow and where it is in that iteration to then go ahead and click on those individual icons or buttons in those particular applications. And then there's basically multiple capabilities to kind of handle changes, right? So whether there's updates or latency through pixelation, color variants, there's image tolerance built in, black and white scaling, and other failure detection techniques to allow you to easily adapt. But the biggest thing that from what we've seen is, so there's an application that changes, and whether it's the login window or new color scheme or whatever, and that basically then requires you to go and update all those individual scripts. In this case, you have something called components and snippets, and it allows you to kind of create nested scenarios and workflows. You just update that one module for login, for instance, and all those scripts are actually updated. So it actually makes a huge difference, and that's what we're most excited about. Really, is those capabilities are built in, and they kind of double down on that image recognition technology. So really, this is the use case that Sam's going to be demoing today. And this came from just multiple customer requests, right? At the end of the day, like when you go ahead and launch that session host, right? You go click on that icon, it's going to load balance you across multiple session hosts in a delivery group or a host pool, right? You don't know which one you're going to get to, right? In a pooled scenario. And that leaves challenges where sometimes those applications, if you're in a scenario where you're hosting, 10, 15, 20 plus apps on a session host, maybe a few of those apps are having an issue through an update. So out of 50 or 100 session hosts, maybe 30% of them are having an issue through an update. How do you know that you're not going to get load balanced to that one, right? So what Automai kind of did, they put a kind of a cool script together relatively easily, where it would actually go through and test each of those applications, right? So each of those session hosts in the delivery group. So what it's going to go ahead and do is it's going to check each of the session hosts, and then on each one of those session hosts, run the actual end user workflow. So what is the end user looking to do in this demo that he's going to do with Salesforce? It's going to run that individual Salesforce workflow. If there's a failure with Salesforce, it'll go ahead and put that VDA in maintenance mode, and then continue down the additional session host in the delivery group.